creating something that's really valuable for that company. So if you're willing to listen, you're willing to have those exchanges, you're willing to support open communication, open dialogue from a horizontal framework, it's a win-win situation.
Welcome to the podcast about communication in business. I'm your host, George Torok. Did you know that I'm known as the speech coach for executives? Because I help business leaders deliver the intended message for greater success. And we do that through one-on-one coaching or group training for the team. On this podcast, you will hear advice and insights from communication experts from around the world. My guest today is Dr. Summer Watson. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Summer. 1, she is a high-performance coach, psychologist, and the founder of Core Women, Core with a K, where she helps companies build impactful cross-generational mentorship and leadership programs. 2, she brings over 30 years of experience in human success, mental health, and organizational leadership, having worked with hospital systems, the military community, in higher education, and nonprofit. And 3, outside of work, she's a passionate podcaster, loves to travel, and a military spouse of 21 plus years who thrives on building inclusive communities and reshaping leadership with heart. And I can't think of any better way than reshaping with heart. Summer Watson, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Thank you so much, George. I'm so happy to be here on Your Intended Message podcast. So glad. I can't wait to get right into this.
I'm delighted to talk with you, certainly because of your experience. And it's always a delight, always a thrill to talk with another podcaster. Our topic for today is on mentoring. And let's start by clarifying, how do you define mentoring?
Thank you for that question, George. That is a great question because throughout the years, there's a very traditional method of mentoring, and that really is from those that have been in a profession or expertise for several years, and they then provide their wisdom, expertise to the other, most likely the younger, right? Someone who is younger. And right now, we have 5 generations in the workforce. 5. And so when we think about that, and I was thinking about mentorship over the years, I've had some great mentors, and those that have been, in most cases, older than me, that have imparted their wisdom, their expertise, their guidance about many different things. And I've been so much in gratitude for that guidance. However, because there are so many different generations in the workforce now, they come with different ideas, different values, different ideations about life, their experiences, their lived experiences, what I call phenomenology, right? Or what Edmund Husserl called lived experience or phenomenology. And so with that said, I knew that there had to be a shift when we were thinking about mentorship and leadership. There's also another model out there called reverse mentorship. And that's where the younger folks are giving some guidance and support to those that maybe are part of an older generation. And that's great. But I also looked at that and thought, there's still some tweaking I'd like to do regarding mentorship to support leadership shifts in today's world and workforce. And so I developed a new approach called Core Mentorship Solutions. And so with that said, my approach is that it is a really horizontal structure. So when we're looking at mentorship, we're looking at mentorship from not a very hierarchical idea or, perspective. We're looking at it from a horizontal perspective, which really minimizes the ego and allows for each person to be a mentor. We have eliminated the word mentee because we want to make sure that this particular program is as inclusive as possible, really helps minimize the ego, really helps boost sharing, really helps break down communication silos, and really helps those companies develop workplaces that are inclusive, that are purposeful, intentional, that want their workforce to grow and to share and feel a sense of belonging. Part of that belonging comes from the ideology and the method of Alfred Adler. And Alfred Adler, I don't know if you know who Alfred Adler is. Okay, great. I see you shaking your nodding your head. So Alfred Adler was somewhat of a derivative of Freud, but he thought, you know what? I'm going to take a shift. And he was a psychologist. He was a psychiatrist. He was both an MD and a PhD. And so he basically said, you know what? I'm going to shift away from Freud because I believe there's more than the subconscious. I believe that people have a longing for belonging, right? And there's more than the psychosexual. There's more than that. It's multiple factors. So he became known as the doctor of modern psychology, also as a holistic practitioner. And so what that meant to me as I studied psychology throughout the years, as I was a clinician, a practitioner, I began to look at that and think, how can I bring that into a mentorship leadership model? And so I have infused that into Core Mentorship Solutions, which falls under Core Women, because I think that people really yearn for that sense of belonging. And when they don't have or feel that they are a sense or have purpose and a sense of belonging, they begin to pull back. They begin to not communicate. They begin to not feel a belonging where they are heard or valued. And so I really wanted to infuse some of Alfred Adler's psychology into the program. So that's the gist of the program as to mentorship and leadership and how we're making that shift for companies to really look at mentorship in a different way that's really more inclusive.
Sense of belonging. I find it curious for a couple of reasons. One, I've been part of CEO mentoring type group for several years. And there was a time actually when I felt that I didn't belong because I'm a sole entrepreneur, whereas all these other people have teams that they run their organizations with. And I always felt like, oh, I'm just little George here in the room here. Don't say much, George. And I mentioned that one time and they quickly corrected me that they saw me as certainly belong to the group and I contribute there. Now, I'm also curious about the sense of belonging. Do you believe that drives mentorship, or the sense of belonging comes as a result of the mentoring?
I think that does both. So I think that it can do both. I think that there is a sense of belonging and someone can feel like they belong if they're heard, if they're understood. So a lot of times in a workplace, when you have so many different generations, there's a lot of stereotyping. There's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of things that are happening in that workplace where people aren't talking. They're not asking questions. And so because of that, somebody may feel a sense of or a lack of belonging. However, when communication is such that it is supported in a certain way, that there are channels for folks to talk about, their values, their creativity, their innovation, they feel heard, then that's going to cultivate a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, a sense of wanting to be there to support the mission of that company, which then, in essence, really helps support that company and retention and so many other things. And so I think it drives, that sense of belonging is driven by somebody's personal passion and purpose. But if they're not understood, or their passion isn't understood, or their values aren't understood, they're not going to have that belonging with that workplace. They're going to feel less heard. They're going to feel less, they're going to feel less excited about being at their job because they're feeling misunderstood. So I think some of it's kind of like that question, is it innate or is it learned, right? And so we have this innate sense of belonging in general, but then we have this learned sense of belonging as well. And so if we look at it from that perspective, I think, it's both, George. So, I think there's a lot of different aspects when we're looking at belonging we can talk about for days.
Now, Summer, I thought of mentoring as where, in the traditional sense, where there's a person who's usually older, but in particular more experience, with more experience and wisdom as a result of that, passing that knowledge on to, the apprentice type of thing. Does that still exist? Does that still work?
It does. But here's the thing, George. I believe it works with the inclusion of acceptance and understanding to hear another's opinion, to hear another's perspective, and to understand that to do that and to embrace somebody else's opinion or understanding or view of the world allows for innovation, allows for increased communication, allows for support. So there's many things you can bring in that legacy of expertise. You can bring in that. Yes, we absolutely want that. But we also absolutely want the understanding that there's 5 generations out there. If you're not open to learning and you're letting your ego get in the way, guess what? You're missing out on a lot. You're missing out on a lot of growth, a lot of understanding, a lot of co-creation, a lot of co-communication. Just a lot. So the benefit to this particular program and why we're making it more of a horizontal framework is that we're trying to minimize that ego so people can feel more heard, can feel more understood, where that communication is taking place for those reasons.
You mentioned the word ego more than once there. I'm curious about that. When you've worked with organizations, have you found egos in place that are jeopardizing the mentoring process?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because a lot of times that ego could be such that I know what I'm talking about, my way or it's the highway. We've seen it happen recently, right? We've seen it happen with Chase Bank or, where that particular CEO was saying, hey, listen, you need to return to work. You need to get your butts back into the office. And that's that, right? And I think, when we're looking at these shifts that are happening in the workplace today, they're going to need some support because here's the thing, George. We have people who in different generations learn different ways. They can offer their services and innovate in different ways. That means they can potentially work from home and do that. They can potentially work in an office and do that. They can potentially have, it's not just a remote work situation, but it's an innovation and creativity situation as well. So certain people might work individually better. Certain people might work in teams. But if you don't understand each other, you don't talk to each other, how is that innovation or that co-creation going to be stunted or improved if you do have better sources of communication or systems of communication? Here's the other thing. Our younger folks, a lot of times, because you have to look at, this is where the Adlerian psychology comes in relation to the different frameworks that are infused, not just infused, but are that impacting these different generations. So when you look at this stuff and you say, what has impacted our younger generations? Well, COVID did. COVID kept these kids at home. COVID also kept these kids, our younger folks or young, people in the workforce now, they've kept them isolated. And so when we ask them to come into a job and expect that they understand a systems approach, why are we expecting that when a lot of times they've been working independently? And yet there may not be any mentorship there. So what's happening is, and there's many articles about that, is, Gen Z is being hired quickly and fired quickly. And the reason being is because they don't understand the system. Who's there to mentor them? You don't just hire them and fire them because they don't understand the system. You put a mentorship program in place to support that workforce, to better understand one another and where they're coming from and what best might not just suit their needs, but how do they work best to support your company? And these are questions that the business owner, that these companies need to start asking. And they also need to it's important to put these mentorship programs in place, especially ones that are cross-generational, to better understand your workforce. Because once you better understand them, guess what? You're going to have that community, that sense of community, that sense of understanding their different values, where they're coming from, understanding their lived experience. So there's so many things that they're going to benefit when they put something like Core Mentorship Solutions in place to have a better dialogue about what's happening and how they can support their workforce.
Summer, so I'm a younger, let's just assume I can dial back the clock several decades. I'm a younger person entering the workforce, and I believe that it would be beneficial if I have some kind of mentoring relationship with someone who can perhaps guide me at some point. Mm-hmm. How might I go about that? Do I find a mentor? Do I talk to my boss and say, who's going to mentor me? Do we talk to HR? Where do we go for that?
George, that is a great question. So there's many places you can go for that. First of all, if you're entering the workforce and you're interviewing with a company, what I would suggest to a company is make something like Core Mentorship Solutions a benefit, and state that to the person that you're interviewing. So let the interviewee know that we have a program like Core Mentorship Solutions in place to be able to help you adjust and grow with our company. And so at that point, then the HR department or the head of a particular department or multiple departments in that company can then start working with that person from the very beginning and start helping them get acquainted, not with just a system, but match them with a mentor. And again, this is a cross-generational mentorship program. So that person who is younger is also going to be a mentor. Again, remember, we've eliminated the word mentee, right? So we're, again, trying to open up that communication where all people in that system, in that workplace, are going to be open to hearing other people's perspectives, understanding that person's lived experience from their lens, from their subjective lens. And with that, that person, those people, whether you're older or somebody just entering into the workforce, is going to feel more heard. Plus, get this, that younger person might be able to offer that innovation, new perspective to help with creating something that's really valuable for that company. So if you're willing to listen, you're willing to have those exchanges, you're willing to support open communication, open dialogue from a horizontal framework, it's a win-win situation.
And Summer, you're coming across loud and clear that the mentoring relationship isn't simply a one-way conveying, I will tell you the wisdom, I will tell you the truth, and you will know it because I have been there before you. So that's not the way it is anymore. Although there is wisdom to be relayed, there's also an exchange of insight and perspective and questioning and challenging. So the mentors on both sides have to be willing to convey what they know and also question what they know and be open to questioning.
Absolutely. And that is so important. Thank you for bringing that up, George. The reason I think this is so important is it's not minimizing, somebody's wisdom or knowledge or legacy or expertise in the field, right? It's being open to all sides. It's not just a one-way street anymore in regards to mentorship. We've got way too many generations out there, and that is stunting and halting innovation for that company. It has to change. I mean, if you think about it, our skin sloughs off daily. Things in our life. We talked about it before the show started about how things can change like that, right? Things change every day. So why are we not willing to change the way that a system looks or the way that a workforce functions together for innovation, to innovate, to continue to grow, to allow that company to grow? Otherwise, you're halting your growth. So you're right. I will continue to say it is so important to shift the way that we look at mentorship. And this is not a woo-woo thing. This is something that is needed. We have way too many generations in the workforce to dismiss the importance of those generations and what they bring to the table. And so if somebody in your workforce is pushing back and saying, nope, but I have all the knowledge, all the wisdom, are you going to question that? Wouldn't you question that, George?
You bet. I always did. That's what got me into trouble.
Well, give me an example. Let's talk about an example of that where you might have questioned that and it might have gotten you into trouble.
Well, okay, I can give an experience from when I was managing a warehouse operation. And I had previously worked in, and this was a warehouse operation in government. And previously I had worked in manufacturing, heavy manufacturing. So I brought the lessons from manufacturing. And in government, they didn't think that way. They didn't think just in time. They didn't think managing the inventories and identifying dead stock. In government, there was no dead stock. Everything is here because we need it. No. It's been sitting there for 2 years and no one's touched it unless it's an emergency supply. So yes, I did challenge that thinking, which did get me into trouble. Even the auditors, I had a hard time convincing them.
Wow. And so as a result of pushing back, what happened?
Things happened my way. It just took time. And it also meant that I had to sit back and reevaluate my own way that I was presenting. That I was presenting my ideas, that I had to understand that, okay, I'm coming from them, I'm coming from a strange world and offering them strange ideas. And of course they're going to fight back. So George, wake up.
Well, there is that resistance, right? And that's what's going to happen with any company in relation to a new framework. So even as KMS gets incorporated into a new workplace system, there's going to be that push and pull, that resistance, right? It's just natural. But, I liked what you said about your intended message, how you were delivering, just like the show, right? How you were delivering that message. And that is so important. And that is also something that we may be able to learn from those in a legacy framework or perspective, right? Or from the person who has been in the system for a longer period of time, because they may have learned how to approach this or how to frame their message in a certain way that people can hear it, right? And I can tell you as an example. So I went to UC Berkeley. And when I was going to UC Berkeley, I worked my way through college. So I didn't have anybody paying for my college. I worked 30 hours a week and I took 17 units a semester. And one of the jobs that I had, which I absolutely loved, is I worked in the student union and I worked as undercover security. And my boss was a woman. And she taught me so many things. She taught me how to dismantle a gun, how to use a gun, how to use a gun responsibly. We didn't do that at the student union, but she taught me a lot of things. And what she also taught me as she promoted me throughout the couple of years that I worked there, she said, Summer, as a leader, the way we say things, the way we get across our intended message has a lot to do with how people are going to hear that message. And they're either going to put up walls because of the way you say that, or you're going to break down those walls where people are going to have an open and honest conversation with you. Because I worked with predominantly men and young men, right? I was a young woman. They were young men. They were working with me and I was their supervisor, and they would do silly things like, gender related things, making fun of certain things or like poking fun, not making fun so much, poking fun. And I said, well, I don't like that. And she goes, I know, but there's certain ways that we can get across our message. And I was so grateful for her. That stuck with me over the years about how do we create a message where we're not building walls, but we're breaking those walls down, where those messages are absorbed, they're taken in, and where we can have a conversation about those things that maybe are difficult conversations, or maybe we just want to grow and we want to be stronger as a team. So what do those messages sound like? How can we create those messages where we're having those dialogues, that kind of dialogue? Yes.
And so what do you recommend? So let's go back to, you're talking to the old fogey in the workplace who's been around for eons, who knows all the issues that have happened over the decades and's got all the experience and the scars. How do you counsel them to deliver their advice in a way that it might be received better?
So I think the first thing is you set a tone, right? You set a tone for the conversation, and you set a safe space up for that conversation where people feel safe to be able to share, right? And then you kind of set the guidelines about, how we're going to share. Because here's the thing, I've led multiple groups that are open groups, closed groups. I've worked with CEOs. I've done lots of consultation. I've worked for lots of different companies, from private to government to all kinds of companies. And I think that what I've learned over the years is when you set the parameters for the conversation, when you create safe spaces, when you are allowing that person to speak and share their value and their values, and they feel appreciated and heard, I think we're going to have more of those walls breaking down where we can have those conversations where they can share and say, okay, you know what? Maybe I can listen to the other because I am feeling valued. This is a safe space to talk. This is a safe space to have conversations where I can better understand A, B, or C. Now, here's the thing with Core Mentorship Solutions. Yes, I might have this background in psychology. Yes, I might have worked for A, B, and C, but I'm not going to be doing all the facilitation. There are people that I have 19 facilitators right now as part of this program that are waiting in the wings to say, hey, you know what? I'm here to help you. And they come from, all different backgrounds and all different generations, as a matter of fact. So I did that on purpose because after somebody signs up with me for the mentorship program, we go through a full assessment. And that assessment really tells me their needs. So it's a needs assessment, right? And so once I go through that, then I can identify the type of trainers and facilitators they need to be able to support their needs. So it's not just going into a company and saying, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do A, B, and C, because that doesn't work. As a community grower, as somebody who has developed large community programs, I learned that over the years, you don't go in and bulldoze. When you don't go in and tell somebody, oh, this is what we're doing, this is what's going to work, and this is, you have to do it A, B, and C way. First, you need to do a needs assessment to see where their needs are, their baseline functioning, and then you get a better understanding of this is where they need more support. This is how we do it. And because I've worked with multiple community-based groups, developing these countywide, developing these multiple programs, every different community has a different personality as well. And that's why it's so important to bring somebody like me in, because I have this history, have this expertise of doing assessments, thousands of them over the years. Thousands. I worked in hospitals. Guess what I did? I ran departments that were triage departments. Guess what you do as a triage department? You listen to somebody's lived experience. You do an assessment quickly to identify their needs and what's going on to keep them safe and not at risk. And so I've done that multiple times. I've ran multiple programs in hospitals as well, developing these different units. And so when I say that it's important to do a needs assessment, it really is, because you get a better understanding of that workplace culture. You get a better understanding of those people's needs, and then you can bring in the trainers and help support that progress, their progress.
Summer, so it sounds like you've given us insight into the core mentorship solutions that you provide.
Yes.
How would a company know that that's something that they might look at, that they might consider? How do they know it's time to consider that?
Well, first of all, if they don't have a mentorship program, it's definitely something to consider. And if they have a mentorship program that isn't working quite as well as they want it to work, or if they're not seeing good results, then it may be time for a shift in what they're offering. The third thing is if they do offer this as a benefit to their employee, that's going to be a huge benefit to their workforce. So I would say take a look at corewomen.com, Kore women.com. there's a tab there that says Core Mentorship Solutions. Go and check it out, right? Or if they have questions, they can contact me on LinkedIn, or they can contact me through Instagram, but predominantly through LinkedIn, because I hang out there all the time with a lot of different people. My network's pretty big. And so, if you have any questions about Core Mentorship Solutions, connect with me, because I want to hear those questions that you might have, the things that you're going through right now that maybe aren't working quite as well for your company as you want them to work. And we can have, a consultation about what it is that your needs are, or even better, what you think your needs are, because it might be that somebody like me is coming from a objective perspective, right? And then we can do that assessment and figure out, oh my gosh, I didn't, that company owner might say, I didn't even know this was going on. Or I didn't know so many people were falling through the cracks here. I didn't know that there was such lack of support in A, B, or C areas. So.
And you can find those links in the description below. My guest today is Dr. Summer Watson, reminding you that the people out there have a longing for belonging. If you like what you heard, tell your friends and post your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, because that helps more listeners find us. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.